Our conversation with Jolyn Armstrong with Grapevine Inner Wellness went so well that we split it into 2 parts. Get ready for part 1. All right, everybody, welcome to this episode of Healthy, Happy, Wise, Wealthy. I have with us today Jolyn Armstrong with all of the letters next to her name, which I'm going to have her explain. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump in. Does that sound good? So Jolyn is a trauma and grief recovery specialist who works with individuals and families who are navigating some of life's most painful chapters, including those who've been impacted by incarceration. So, and as someone, Jolyn, who has walked through deep personal loss, she brings a lot of compassion, clarity, and proven tools to help others heal. And she uses her training in DBT, which is let me look at my notes, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy and Polyvagal theory, which we're going to ask her what those things are, and her skills as a somatic practitioner and a certified breathwork facilitator, so we have someone else who does breathwork, to help her clients regulate their nervous system. So, Jolyn, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited that you are.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I met Jolyn just kind of in the course of business and realized that this is a lady that I would like to know more about, and and so we've had a few talks together and have probably a lot of things in common. But I love the work that you're doing. So start out, can you tell us what the letters mean? Tell everyone what those mean.
I don't know what any letters are, right? Those are certifications that I hold. I'm a certified trauma recovery coach, a grief recovery specialist, and a certified somatic embodiment specialist. So those are just some specialized trainings that I hold and that I use in my practice.
Yeah. So, and you are, so mainly is it like a trauma recovery coach? And yeah. So tell us, just let me start out. I actually, before we even go into this, I want to know some of the things, like a little bit more about some of the things that you use when you work with people. Mm-hmm. So cognitive behavioral therapy, and I know a little bit about this from like when you're going to a counselor, right? You might use that. So that, and what is the difference between that and the other one, which I have my notes because I forget. Dialectical behavioral therapy, am I saying it right? DBT?
Yep. Okay. Yep. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. Dialectics is just the idea that we can hold 2 different views to be true at the same time. There is light and there is dark. There can be opposing views. There can be opposing beliefs in the same mind, heart, nervous system, that kind of thing. But dialectical behavioral therapy is it's a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. There is a lot of overlap. It's a lot of cognitive reframing. But in dialectics, we had a really healthy portion of, a really healthy portion of mindfulness. Can you believe I forget the word mindfulness while I'm talking about mindfulness? How's that? But what I love about that, if you have experienced CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in counseling ever, you understand that there is a lot of kind of really detailed and deep explanation of what each of the practices and kind of reframes does in your mind, right? Yeah. If you look at something in this way, you can help change your behavior. You can see something from a different angle, which changes everything, right? And that's what DBT does with mindfulness too. There are actually 3 different kinds of mindfulness that it explains. And it tells you, if we, for example, one of them is just practicing observing, not describing, not doing anything. I'm just going to observe, right? This is a glass container. It has a clear liquid in it. I have a straw in here that is kind of blue and clear, but I'm just going to observe this container. I'm not going to assume that the clear liquid is water because I can't assume it, right? And so what does observing do for your mind? Well, that helps us to stop assuming things that may be harmful for us, right? And so that's just one kind of example of how DBT helps us understand mindfulness, and it brings that into that practice of kind of cognitive work.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love the term reframing because I've used that when one of the first people that I had on the podcast, one of them is Kara Stoltenberg, who is a coach also. So hers is a focus maybe a little bit more on health and physical health and then emotional health, a little bit of that. But she's the one I remember who used the word reframing with me. So, and that was very helpful because you kind of, for me, it was like going back into, you just kind of are in a pattern of saying, this doesn't work because this is bad because I can't do this because, and then you list things that are real. You list things that are, you probably aren't making them up. There's real reasons. Like, for me, maybe as an example, I can't go back to school because I have all these children and because my health isn't good. There's all these, there's reasons, right? So then there's the reframing. So that's what I would like for you to think of. Tell me about that. Like give me use me as an example. So if I were to say to you, I can't go back to school because I have so many children and all their issues to take care of, what would be an example of reframing that you would maybe use with that?
Right, right. Well, I would first look with you on what does going back to school look like? What does that mean to you, right? So we're looking at the frame. I want to have a good idea of what the frame that you're looking at this through. Well,
Right.
school means I'm living on campus and I'm going to school, 4 or 6 classes at a time, something like that. And then I don't have time to work and I don't have time to take care of my kids and that kind of thing. Well, okay, I can see why you would think that. And with that frame of what going back to school means, of course. But let's look at this a different way. And can you get some further education even with kids? Can you take a class? Can you take a virtual class? Let's look at that, right? Instead of, I can't do this because, well, let's see how we maybe could and what that would look like in your life, right? So that may be a little reframe. Or if the only way you ever want to go back to school is full-time living on campus, whatever, maybe it's I can't go back to school. It's okay, I'm choosing not to go back to school right now because I'm choosing to focus on my kids. Okay, that's a choice you're making, and it's a valid choice too. Maybe going back to school happens when they're a little bit older. Maybe they're in school if your kids are little, right? That kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few ways that we can look at that, and usually when someone says I can't, I want to explore that. Okay, is it I can't, or is it I'm choosing not to, or is it right now there are higher priorities?
Yeah. I love that one because that's exactly what I was thinking too in terms of reframing, because usually when we're in a bad place, it's always like I can't because I'm no good because, and then
Yes.
I choose not to because I have better other priorities that are taking precedence, is such a better power move. So hopefully anyone listening will take just that little nugget and go, well, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, I can look at this way. Yeah. Anytime can't comes into my vocabulary, that's a good kind of trigger for me to say, oh, wait a minute, what actually am I thinking here, and how can I reframe that?
Right. Yeah. Because we actually can't do everything. So we make choices on what we're going to choose to do based on the priorities in front of us.
Yeah.
That's much stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So explain polyvagal theory. What is that?
Yeah, polyvagal theory is just the education and the knowledge behind our vagus nerve, which is really the branch of our nervous system that helps with calming us back down after a terrifying or activating event, right? This is our parasympathetic nervous system. So for those who don't know, sympathetic nervous system is kind of our activator. This is fight or flight. This is getting us moving. This is all of that, right? And typically if we have a really scary event, we have that fight or flight for a moment, and then our parasympathetic nervous system comes in and says, okay, danger's over. We're okay. The tiger ran away, right? Tiger's now gone, and we can calm back down. The other side of that, though, there are two kind of branches of the vagus nerve of polyvagal theory. That is, if fight or flight is, we're full fight or flight, we're in danger, but that's not helping us, the vagus nerve then can come in and shut us down even in danger. So we see this with, playing a possum, right? Possums play dead in order to save their lives, right? I see that. I saw a cat with a mouse in his mouth recently, right? And you think the mouse is dead until the cat drops it and then it runs off. Well, that was the vagus nerve playing its role, and the mouse playing dead. So what that looks like in humans is I've been so stressed for so long. I'm terrified of everything. I just am not getting out of bed today. Right? I can't leave my house. I'm not going out that door. That world is not what I want to participate in, right? And so that kind of shutdown mode, that, oh my gosh, I just lost 2 hours of time. This happens a lot with traumatized individuals, people who have been stressed and anxious for too long, and their nervous system is just like, okay, enough. Mm-hmm. And so polyvagal theory teaches us, how that vagus nerve comes into play and why it does what it does emotionally and physically in our body. So that's polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve, essentially.
So when you use this with people, are you using it more like that cognitive way where you're explaining what it is and what they're dealing with based on their nervous system? Is that kind of how you?
Yeah. So what I've found is when people can understand why their body and their emotions are reacting in the way that they are, it's easier for them to have some ownership over that and to take some control and to feel like they're a little bit more in control. Yeah. And so with the vagus nerve, what I love to do is first, show people what that looks like in their system, talk to them about, what has been going on with you, and what I've been hearing from you maybe is a little bit of this, right? Or when somebody's in fight or flight all of the time, they're just ratcheted up, their blood pressure is high, their breathing is shallow, all of those things. I can use some of that understanding and education with them to help them bring that back down, even temporarily, right? Say, okay, here's how we can do this. Here's some exercise. And maybe we'll get into a little bit of that today, but I teach them some ways that privately at home or even in public, they can bring themselves back down. They can tap into their vagus nerve. Yes, with cognition, just with mindset and with some things like that, but also physical, like palpating different areas of our body where there are vagus nerve endings, coupled with mindset. That's the most effective thing to do.
I would love to hear more of that. Yeah, if you can give us an example, why not now?
Okay, all right, we can do that. So I always, this is kind of an individual thing, and I always like to warn people before you start to tap into your vagus nerve, you do want to make sure that you and your nervous system together understand that you are actually in a safe place, right? Because what we want to do is tap into the branch of our vagus nerve that is kind of rest and digest, that relaxation mode, not the freeze in fear state, right? Deer in the headlights look. So we want to be careful with that. So I always like to start with mindset. If you find yourself worked up right now and you're just like, oh my gosh, right? People oftentimes when I meet them in public have just been in Reno traffic, right? And they come to me like, and so we first start with some just grounding exercise. Okay, if you find yourself worked up like that, one, look at people's faces around you, right? When we're looking in people's faces, there's a calming effect typically, right? If that's a lot for you, you can also just look like I look at the floor below me. Okay, yeah, everything's safe down below me. I look behind me. There's no tiger back there, right? I look for exits. Okay, there's a door over there. There's a window here. I don't want to use the window as an exit, but that's a possibility too. When my nervous system knows that there's safety below me and behind me and that I know where the exits are, I'm starting to calm down a little bit, right? And so, okay, I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna look at that. And then there are, if we're in public, some places that we can start to palpate our vagus nerve. One that doesn't draw much attention at all. I like to use my collarbone right here. And I can so what I say is, here's my collarbone between my fingers here. I rub right below it. There's a little dip kind of in from your shoulder. There's a little dip there. If I just rub that a little bit I put a little bit of pressure there, right? I'm just going to rub that a little bit. There's a good nerve ending right there. And I've told myself I'm safe. And I'm looking around and I'm just fine. This is a super normal thing to do in public. Just be, have your hand right here and just rubbing that for a few seconds. Right now, I've just tapped into my, yeah, okay, I'm a little bit looser. I'm a little bit fine. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's two really good examples for anyone listening on things we can do to be calmer in stressful situations when we hit stress. So for whatever reason that is. So thank you for those two examples. So somatic exercises, and I know we're going to get all into Jolyn's story, by the way. For whatever reason, I decided it was most important, I don't want so my Midwestern background coming in, to talk about the different things that she does so that you can be thinking about this as we go. Why would you do this? Like, why would be a reason to, when should we do this? When should we go get help for where our nervous system is too stressed? And what are some examples of things we can do right in the moment when I feel like, especially, and you mentioned this earlier in a talk we had earlier about COVID, we're very stressed. I think there's probably more stress today since even that event than probably maybe ever, who knows, but we have stress. So, and that's such a common thing. So somatic exercises, let's talk about that for a second. What is it and how would we use it?
Yeah. Somatics just means of the body, right? And so as we learn more about the overlap between our emotions, our nervous system and our physical body, trauma impacts our physical body and it impacts our emotions, right? And very often our body stores that trauma for years to come. Like you said, COVID's way behind us, but our nervous systems don't have the same kind of clock that we have, right? Our nervous system very often, for those of us who were really traumatized during that COVID experience, many people were, our nervous system is back in there unless we've been able to move that trauma out of our nervous system. And somatics helps us do that. So when you can couple mindset with body movements and specific body movements that help us to move that trauma through our system, we complete that trauma cycle. Very often we're stuck in trauma. Our nervous systems are, you've heard the term PTSD. We have these symptoms because we haven't completed a trauma cycle, right? And so somatics helps us do that. I like to couple mindset with movements that are specific to the nervous system that's been injured with a traumatic event in order to help that trauma move through.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah.
What might be?
Yeah. So really, one that probably most people would potentially understand is the nervous tick in someone like a soldier who's been to war, right? So I was speaking with a soldier once who had this tick like this. Like he did just this little, often, like a little tick like what I'm doing right here. And the reality is when you're in war and you see a bomb go off or something like that, what does your body do? You do this to protect yourself. His body was doing that. And he didn't understand that was just, he had trauma in his nervous system stuck. And to be able to create some movements that would help that complete that movement, but in safety, to move from a place of emotional danger and not physical danger, because we're not going to put him back into a physically dangerous situation, but emotionally we can put him back in that for a short period, finish that movement and move him out, like move that trauma out of his system and complete that, is a beautiful healing step for someone like that. And to lesser degrees, those of us who have experienced emotional trauma, even that is way less than a soldier in war, may find little things like that. And I can help with, okay, you've been made to feel small in some way. You've been through an experience that you didn't have any control over and was terrifying for you. Let's create some movements with some mindset that can help that trauma move out of your system.
So what might be an example of a movement you would do? Like, for example, with that soldier that you did, like what might be the movement that would help?
Yeah. So in something like that, the soldier's doing this to protect himself, but
Right.
the danger's still there, right? So in his mind, we're making a movement like this, and we're coming back through like, oh, look, I am safe. Actually, everything's fine. And now we're coming into a full big body stance, right?
Yeah.
Someone who, maybe a more common traumatic experience for somebody in our world, right? That soldier that hasn't been to war, whatever. I've worked with families who, for example, were going through the medical system, and just, I'm being run through a battery of tests because I've got some illness and I'm not even sure what it is. And we're testing and testing and testing. And I'm just here and I'm being told I'm going to be stuck with this thing or that thing, right? This happens quite a little bit with more chronic illnesses coming, right? So I'll help them get small in their body and then push out and wait a minute, I'm going to take up space now. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Get small in the body and then push sideways. I'm going to take up space, right? And I'm really simplifying it. We're going to find some mindsets to use, right? I'm getting small. Who am I hearing? What are the doctors saying to me? What's happening in my body? What am I telling myself? Okay, now I'm going to be okay, right? Now what am I telling myself? And so we usually will pair these movements with mindsets, with phrases that we say to ourselves and out loud. And so it's, yeah. I'm really simplifying the movements, and in the experience, just for time's sake. But yeah.
Well, that's helpful because I've done a lot of different work, probably similar to what is somatic exercises. But if I had to explain it to someone, I don't think I could. So I appreciate you giving that example because I find that very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. And I would say that one of the reasons I even wanted to start doing this podcast is because I do think in general, I don't feel like the world understands how much our nervous system is controlling us, and that if we've had something go on that's, caused grief, shock, anxiety, trauma, that our nervous system remembers that, even if it's precognition, like before our age of memory, maybe even in the womb, like all the way back. So the fact that there is this thing that we're not paying attention to that's in control, and that we just can't just shame somebody into being better, and some of the things you hear, just forgive, just choose to not do it, just make a choice. And it's actually like, choice is great. And forgiveness is great, but it's not the whole picture of the nervous system. The nervous system is its own intelligence, or lack thereof.
Yes.
Maybe from what I've seen. So, yeah. Do you agree?
I love that. And this is my my little gripe about, mantras in general, right? These and phrases that we use sometimes. You can do it, that kind of thing. If we're only working with cognition or only working with our body, there's the link there isn't happening enough, right? So you can do all the positive self-talk you want, but if there's something still lying in wait in your nervous system, we're never going to be able to complete that until we can pair up the somatics, or the body movements, and healing of the nervous system with the mindset. So it is, I love the research that's going on around kind of that tying in our nervous system with our body, with our emotions, all of that.
Yeah. And I do think, just to add on that, and I just had this experience again, but you don't know you've had trauma always until a similar experience is happening that makes your nervous system go crazy. Like the nervous system is all calm when there's not a thing going on to trigger it. And then the thing, the person, the similar situation, it's usually, I don't know, whatever it is, happens. And then your nervous system goes,
wait a minute. Yes.
I didn't know. I thought I dealt with this, but I didn't even know I had to deal with something, or I didn't even know my nervous system was going to react like that. So right? Is that what you would say too? Is that you don't know until you know?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are other clues too. And sometimes we deny that we've been traumatized, right? Or we just
Oh,
don't know
everyone,
what it means, right?
yeah. Or
Or we think we've been traumatized when we haven't been, potentially. That can happen too. And so there is, our mind can play tricks on us. It's not right. That part of our mind isn't as smart as maybe our prefrontal cortex either. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very good. All right, let's go to the next one. You do breath work. So the very last guest that I had on does events for breath work, and I had gone to his event, and it was, I think they've been very, very helpful in healing to people coming in and just moving that breath through. And so yours, I saw ancient prana yama breath work.
Breathwork. That's another term for just of the body too, and energy, controlling our energy with our breath. I love breath work because it's one of the only kind of autonomic system that we have. We have autonomic systems. Our heart beats without us ever thinking about it, right? We can breathe without ever thinking about it. But we can't will our heart to beat, right? That's just fully automatic. We don't have any control over it. Right. But our breath can either be automatic or we can take control of it. And with that, it's this beautiful bridge between our body and our mind, right? And so to use that to gain some control and utilize that and just bridge that gap. Very often in trauma, people wind up with this dissociation that happens, right? We feel separated from our bodies for lots of different reasons. And breath work is just such a beautiful way to kind of bring that back together and bring healing. I love it. Yeah.
And I feel like I for someone who knows about it, I don't use it enough.
So, none of us do.
Yeah. Like I'm not as and I've been awful, I think, my whole life with holding my breath. So it's like if anyone who really, really needs to focus on breath work, it's probably me. So and I'm here as a learner. So do you have an example of something that people could do that's simple? Let's say their stress level is super high. They're just feeling a lot of stress, and it might just be a simple thing where there's just not enough time to get done what they have to get done, let's say. And they're feeling pressure.
Well, one thing that really helped me when I learned this was the fact that when we're breathing out, when we're in that actively breathing out phase of our breath, our heart rate slows down. And when we're breathing in, our heart rate raises a little bit. That's why you see the difference in when you're looking at one of those, whatever heart rate monitor things, whatever that's called. Yeah. I mean, they look different. It's based on when you're breathing too. It affects that. And so if my heart's racing, if I'm super stressed, I'm not going to be able to get a lot done. Because, when I'm super stressed, I need to calm myself down a little bit. What I do is I take some deep breaths, but I make sure the out breath is longer than the in breath. And that's naturally going to calm me down a little bit. It's going to slow my heart rate. It's going to clear some space in my head for, okay, let's start thinking about what to do first, right?
Yeah.
Alternatively, if I am in shutdown mode and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't even, all I want to do is go to bed, right? Which I think many of us have experienced when we're overloaded. We know from polyvagal theory that maybe our nervous system is going into shutdown a little bit on purpose, right? But to pep myself up a little bit, I'm going to make my in-breaths a little bit more longer and more dramatic than my out-breaths. I'm going to give myself some energy. Wait a minute, I can control this. I am in some control of this. I'm going to bring myself back to my body so that I can get some things done. I don't have to shut down.
That's fabulous. I love those two. It's so practical. And I think I might even be able to remember that.
Yeah. We can make it easy in the moment.
We'll be able to remember to implement that.
There we go.
Yeah. I think there's one idea where like you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. But like I've never heard anyone say when you breathe out, your heart rate goes down. So that's such an easy thing to do if you're like feeling stressed. Quick breath and a long exhale. Man, that's great.
Yeah.
That's so easy.
So
Thank
easy.
you for that. So, okay, next topic. We've kind of gone over all the stuff that you do. So, on your website, and I know in talking to you, there's some things we talk about trauma, and then I saw a lot of things related to, you say, I'm going to look at my notes, but grief, depression, and anxiety and chronic stress. But the one that kind of stuck out to me was grief, how grief and trauma. So you go through something that is a loss, an unexpected loss,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how that can be turned into trauma. So I don't, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, sure. Yeah, what I've learned in my practice and in study too, but even more so in practice and in education, was that every person that comes to me needing help with trauma, there's a grief component, right? We're grieving our life before whatever trauma has happened. We're grieving the future that we had planned for ourselves that isn't going to exist anymore, right? There's always a grief component in trauma recovery. But not every grief experience is traumatic, right? So I know that I can help somebody through a grief experience without ever having to deal with trauma, right? So losing someone who they're a grandparent, for example, who, okay, circle of life, we knew that we were going to lose them, that kind of thing. There's some grief there potentially, right? But it may not be traumatic, right? We may not have experienced that trauma. But what you were bringing up with is, a sudden loss, somebody or a major loss where, a loss has happened in a really traumatic way, a car accident, or, I interviewed someone recently who had survived a mass shooting. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about a traumatic loss here, right? People around her that she, was working with, were friends with, whatever, were dropping around her, and she survived it. And so there was all kinds of trauma. There was all kinds of grief with that too. And so, with something like that, I'm going to really assess, okay, what should we tackle first? Let's maybe regulate your nervous system so that then we can work through the steps to heal your grief, right? But we need to first get your nervous system kind of under control here, right?
Right. Yeah. So if there's something that happens, let's go like a life situation that can happen to almost anyone, where like you lose your job, so you lose your income. Can you give an example about when that would be something that's hard, because that's hard,
right?
And when it would be something that would go into, now it's affecting your nervous system? And maybe even before we do that, can you define for us what would be the point where it feels like it's trauma and not just a hard event?
Absolutely. And I think that is a great example. Like, you've lost your job, right? And maybe your career, a job that you've had for a long, long time, right? This happened to a lot of us during COVID, right? Oh my goodness, a mass job loss event. So yeah, let's talk about what's trauma versus something that's really hard. There are a lot of different kinds of definitions of trauma in our world, and I think that it's been a little maybe overused, right? Not every hard event is trauma. But if you have experienced emotional trauma, it deserves some respect and some attention, for reals. So there's typically 3 elements that I look at when I'm assessing if somebody has really experienced trauma. One is an outside event that is like losing your job, right? Nobody wants that to happen. So an outside of an event that is either intensely frightening or maybe perceived as a moral injury, right? And during this outside event, there's some nervous system overwhelm, right? With that intense fright, our nervous system starts to get overwhelmed. We can't catch our breath. We're in fight or flight for an extended period of time, that kind of thing. We can't get out of it, right? So that's one element of that, which a job loss could be really intensely frightening, or depending on the circumstances of it, maybe a moral injury, right? Depending on why you have, whatever reason was given for you losing your job, right? Another element is having no control over the event at all, or the outcome of the event. Again, that could be present in a job loss, right?
Right.
And then the third element in that I look for when assessing trauma is that the individual's belief about or interactions with themselves or the world around them has been changed, right? So if I have been, a banker for 27 years and I'm just suddenly fired and I'm not really given reason, or I've been told, well, you just don't fit in here anymore, or you made some crazy mistake that I didn't think that I made, but they're telling me that I made this, whatever it is, right? Wow, my sense of identity as a banker is now, who am I now? Who am I without this job, right? And some people may lose their job and be completely fine. They're upset and whatever, but okay, I'm going to go find another job, and they're not traumatized by it. It's hard and it's terrible. And this, I might spend a week or two crying in bed, but I'm not traumatized. I'm just upset about it.
Yeah.
And other people may be completely turned upside down. And oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Like, who am I if I don't have this job? And I can't seem to gain control over anything anymore, right? And so I like to say I'm not sure if there are any traumatic events, but there are a whole bunch of potentially traumatic events in our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with that too, that one thing that came to mind with that is that I recently had a conversation with a brain doctor who's done different kinds of work. And he said something, I don't agree. He said, he said he maybe didn't agree with what PTSD was. And part of the reason was that I think there's PTSD, but his story made sense to me. And it was all about what happens afterwards. So I think in this situation, it's like, if you have no money saved up, and if you are now homeless and your spouse leaves you and you can't provide for something for your child, and then something bad happens to your child, all these different things, that would be way more traumatic than someone who's just, is about to retire in 5 years and it's an insult to their identity. It's a different because of the outcome. So like, for example, this doctor said in his, I think it was World War II vets, but the ones who were, I don't remember the country, but they went back and had been farmers. And so when they went back, they were the skilled labor. They were looked well upon. They got the prettiest women in the village to marry them. So they didn't have PTSD, where the U.S. vets found that because their pay wasn't great, so they kind of like went downhill in status over time. So then the downhill in status is what caused the PTSD. So it feels like the issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just bringing that up because it does seem like it's just all the different things that can come into play in an event such as that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so some of the elements that I was talking about, I think this doctor has hit on, right? Your beliefs about the world, your interactions with yourself and the world are changed by this event, right? That may be what he's touching on, but trauma can happen over a period of time like that. There's complex PTSD as well. This very often happens when somebody's in a traumatic experience for an extended period of time, right? Very often that gets conflated with, childhood issues. If you've had a really terrible, abusive childhood, oftentimes there's complex PTSD diagnoses after that. But that can happen as an adult as well, right? But yeah, there's a really good book, The Body Keeps the Score, that talks about what happens in your nervous system when a traumatic event happens. And I'd love to talk to that brain doctor, his opinion about these things, right? Where a one-time instantaneous event can cause some trauma, like a car accident, a plane crash, something like that. Somebody coming out of a plane crash that they survive and nobody else did, or what I mean? Half the plane is whatever. That can be pretty traumatic. That could be a traumatic experience for one person and not the other, even with similar events afterwards. So yeah, for me, I look more at how did the nervous system react? Did it get overwhelmed? Were you able to maintain some control over your nervous system or not?
Yeah. And maybe even knowing some of the tools that we talked about earlier in this, episode and other ones can be helpful in future, in the events, because, there's things that we don't want to have happen that happen. And that's part of being a human.
Absolutely.
So it's not just like, oh, I lived through this hard thing when I was a kid and then I picked myself up by my bootstraps and now life is perfect and you should be like me. And I do feel like that's some popular, like some of the people we talk to and listen to, and especially in the world of sales. And I've been in sales a lot. I'm like, you all just stop. I don't even, I can't even, no, I just can't even.
Yeah.
So, but we got to have that. It's mindset's great, but we have to have that ability to tap into our humanity, which is all the emotions and the stored emotions and all that stuff. And that concludes part 1 with Jolyn Armstrong of Grapevine Inner Wellness. Come back next week for part 2.